these first two texts, please ask yourself which of the two scenarios you prefer. This first text should be familiar. In fact, both texts should be familiar to everyone here. John Lennon, Alav HaShalom, of Beatle fame. So maybe you'll remember this song, Imagine.
Yeah.
Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will be as one. And then together with that, from the book of Yeshayahu, Isaiah, our Tanakh, Lo Yisagoy El Goy Cherev. We're all familiar with one day nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. So I'm asking you, which of these two texts do you prefer?
The second one, obviously.
What? Don't say obviously. Is that Stephen?
Yes, because the first one is not reality. It's not the human condition. The second one is
Doable.
is
doable.
Is doable. Okay. Anyone else?
Well, I think you could compare it to the way the United States and Canada, where the United States is a melting pot and Canada is a mosaic. And you need to respect the individuality of others and let them be. Otherwise, if there's no differences, then everything melds and there's no individual entities.
So that leads you to say that the second one is positive. Am I assuming because, obviously because there won't be war, but also it's still recognizing the need that there will be nation and nations. And as long as you said that, there's a question to me that's so obvious. How can you respect others if those others don't have their own particularity, whether that's person to person or people to people? Okay. Now, I'd like us to delve in today's discussion with my teacher, our teacher, Eliezer Schweid, and the question that he poses here. How do we resolve the tension between the absolute universalism of the Tanakh, and there's no question about it, and our people's uniqueness as the recipient of its detailed commandments? You can't deny, if you read through the Tanakh, that it's clear that there's a universal longing. On the other hand, you also can't deny that this book was given to us. Now that has caused problems for so long, because people assume that if it was given to us and we are called the chosen people, that's understood to mean that we are superior. I'd like it to be clear that that's not what the intention is. Different and maybe a certain responsibility,
Yeah.
but not superior. Alavai that we could say that we are in different realms. Sometimes I think we are, and sometimes not so. So, yet another teacher of mine, Shalom Rosenberg, these are going back to my days at Hebrew University, discusses this notion when he says, let us imagine a fish who must swim upstream in order to reach the place to lay its eggs. Our fish sees all the other fish swimming in the opposite direction. They swim effortlessly, carried by the current. However, our fish is propelled forward by the imperative of its special mission. Allow me to emphasize that we are speaking not of elitism, but of chosenness. A sense of chosenness is necessary to maintain the momentum of any organism which dares to swim against the current. Any other explanation of the concept of chosenness is, according to this approach, irrelevant, for we are no different from any other nation, save in the mission which we have pledged to fulfill, the preservation of the Torah. How do you feel about this theory of Shalom Rosenberg's? Do you relate to it? Do you think it's still a notion that is alive and well?
Bracha, I think when you said earlier about the fact that we were chosen to receive the Torah, but we were chosen also to assume the responsibility of making the world a better place and reaching out to other peoples of the world, that's really important. And if you've ever watched the salmon going upstream to lay their eggs, and the way that they keep being battered back, but still going forward because they have a destiny, it's almost what we say about the Jewish people. We have a destiny and we have to move forward and battle against all of the things that happen to us in order to get to that destiny.
Beautifully said. And I would imagine if you're saying it, Marlene, that you feel that, you believe it. My question is, though, and maybe this gets us back to Linda's statement or comment before when she mentioned the interview with Rabbi Feinstein, Ed Feinstein, and Rabbi Sachs. Is it a notion that we have a destiny, forget chosenness, but that the world is in a lousy state? We have our wonderful moments, thank God, but it is. And do we feel that it is our responsibility to try to do whatever we can to change it? Now, keep in mind, other nations should also be feeling that. But we were given that responsibility. And if we don't fulfill it, then shame on us. So that's what I'm asking. Do we see this as a mission still? What do you think?
Depends who we is.
I'm sorry, one at a time?
Go ahead, Stan. I said.
Stan,
it
you're
depends
on
who
mute.
we-
Someone? Nobody wants to say?
I just said it
Okay.
depends who we is.
Go on.
You said, do we still feel chosen?
Okay,
Who's we?
but again, when you say it like, do we still feel chosen? I want it to be absolutely clear what we mean by that chosen. Not a reward, but achrayut, a responsibility. And yes, as Marlene said, not just to us first perhaps, but to the entire world. And that's what I mean about the Tanakh being both particular and universal. Anybody else want to share a thought about this?
Okay,
Steve,
Steve.
you're breaking up, Stephen.
That question, my teachers told me, would this, there wasn't
sorry.
Jewish people the last 2,000 years.
Stephen, it's hard to understand what you're saying.
What would this world be like if there wasn't a Jewish people as a compass in the world this past 3,000 years?
And you mean that seriously?
I mean, when it applies
I'm sorry, Stephen, you're being
to
cut
civilization.
off, breaking up. But as long as you said that, I'm going to skip just to show you that you are thinking in the same way that the historian, the Roman Catholic historian, Paul Johnson, thought in his book, The History of the Jews. The world without the Jews would have been a radically different place. To them, we owe the idea of equality before the law, both divine and human, of the sanctity of life and the dignity of the human person, of the individual conscience, and so of personal redemption, of the collective conscience, and so of social responsibility, of peace as an abstract ideal, and love as a foundation of justice, and many other items which constitute the basic moral furniture of the human mind. And like Stephen, Paul Johnson said, without the Jews, it might have been a much emptier place. Do we agree?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, I want us to look a little more at this tension between the particular and the universal and recognize that it goes way back. And maybe it's not a tension. It's a call for being both particularistic and universal. So we begin Breshit, Genesis 15. On that day, God made a covenant with Avram. And we all know that that covenant was unique to what now is going to be the nation of Avram, who has chosen to believe in one God. And that's unique to us. But if we go back a number of chapters to Breshit 9, we see, and God said to Noah, and Noah, by the way, was not Jewish. It's interesting, some younger students assume that Adam and Eve and Noah must have been, because they're in the Torah, Jewish. And God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you. This is to make it very clear that God has a relationship with every one of his creations, and a particular one with Avram's people. But again, for the purpose that we said, he saw when he first created the world that it wasn't the Gan Eden that he was expecting, and had to make a change of plans and felt I've got to go about this differently. I can't assume the whole wide world, but I have to do it through one group of people. We go on. Familiar with this from Bamidbar, Balaam, the non-Jewish prophet, looks down on Bnei Israel, the Israelites, and he states a fact. There is a people that dwells apart, not reckoned among the nations. Okay? That's going back to Numbers, and I believe some of us would agree, if not all, that this is still the situation. Please mute yourselves.
Yes.
On the other hand,
Not
if we go to
or not.
Don't know how to mix.
Yeshayahu, Isaiah, we see what we're all familiar with. I, the Lord, in my grace, have summoned you, and I have grasped you by the hand. I created you and appointed you a covenant people, a light unto the nations, or La Goyim. Now, how are we meant, how do you visualize that light? What does it mean to say we will be a light unto the nations? What does it mean? And how would that come to fruition? Anyone? We're all familiar with that phrase. What does it mean?
A shining example.
Okay, an example, a shining example, beautiful phrasing, since it's light.
Thinking that, when Moshe gave his last testament, before Yehoshua took us into Israel.
Yes,
So the whole idea was that we were supposed to be a nation that followed the laws and conquered the people, but to set up a system of righteousness. And it should be a law system that respected the people as well as the stranger.
yeah, very good. Absolutely. Okay, so we have that message again of us knowing how to behave because we were given the book, and how to treat others. And in Shmot, it actually goes on to say what Bev has just alluded to. The Lord called to Moshe from the mountain saying, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples. Indeed, all the earth is mine, but you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now, when you read that, and you've read this before and you hear this, please mute. How do you react to that? Please.
Hello?
I'm not able to mute. Okay. How do you react? Do you feel, wow? And I'm not exaggerating, I mean it. Do you feel a wowness in that look at what we were summoned to do? Or do we say, nah? Does it excite you? Does it say, maybe it's time to take this seriously? Anyone?
I feel disappointed and distressed at the evil actions of fellow persons claiming to be Jews. It affects all of us.
What did he say?
I don't know if I want to go there. I'm trying to stay away from that today. I think what Stephen was trying to say is that he's bothered, as we all should be, when there are some Jews that don't follow this calling, are not the shining example, if I understood, without being more specific.
But Bracha, I think that if you really look at that statement,
Yes.
we are being given an extremely heavy, I would call it a burden. I mean, this responsibility is huge. And so for me, it's do your best and I will look upon you favorably. It's like your father, may he rest in peace, always used to talk about the ladder of observance. And so if we continue to try, like the salmon, to keep going upstream and reaching the destiny, then God will look favorably upon us.
Absolutely. I mean, in Pirkei Avot, when it says it's not for us to finish the job, but at least if we know that we're beginning, But to call it a burden, I can appreciate. Yeah, it would be a hell of a lot easier if we didn't feel a responsibility. That goes for many areas in life. So I guess it can be both. It's a burden because I feel that I should be doing this. On the other hand, it's a calling. It's a calling. Of course, it's a very big thing. It's a very big thing. But I guess it's for each individual to find something, to feel that you're doing something toward bettering our people and the world.
We
Okay.
have to better ourselves. We have to keep thinking of how we can better ourselves and, be more caring,
Absolutely. We have to think of ourselves. We're far from perfection.
Bracha, I find it, I think, speaking of us in those terms, I understand it intellectually, but I think it's awfully challenging to speak in those terms to a younger generation today.
Well, that's an issue. And this isn't the first time that this has come up. Weeks ago, you and Stan, I don't want to take the time to remember exactly, but you talked of this as the younger generation. Well, that's a concern.
It is a concern, but the question
is a concern. So what does that mean though, Linda? If it's a concern, what do you do with that concern? Or do you just say it's
well, I don't know. We need a new kind of language, not to throw away the old, but I mean, the way people are communicating today with the media and so on, I mean, there are young people who do want to steep themselves in it, and will get it. But I think it's really the fish going uphill.
okay? Well, Shimshon Raphael Hirsch elaborates. My favorite modern commentator elaborates on this verse of Mamlechet Kohanim, and he says the following: if, however, in the midst of a world which worships wealth and lust, Israel were to live a tranquil life of righteousness and love. Excuse me, I'm sorry. That was a bit of a, if, while everywhere else, the generation of man is sinking into the depth of sensuality and immorality, Israel's sons and daughters should bloom forth in the splendor of youth, purity, and innocence. Ah, what a powerful instrument for good Israel could be. If every Jew would be a mutely eloquent example and teacher of universal righteousness and universal love. If thus the dispersed of Israel were to show themselves everywhere on earth as the glorious priests of God and pure humanity, if only we were or would become that which we should be, if only our lives were a perfect reflection of our law, what a mighty force we would constitute for steering mankind to the final goal of all human education. This would affect mankind more quietly, but much more forcefully and profoundly than ever our tragic record of suffering. When I hear that ending paragraph, to me, it reminds me of a distaste that I would have, with all due respect, for Shoah education, when I would see high school students signing up for that course about the Shoah more than any other Jewish course. Of course it's important, very, very important. But there's got to be something more than that tragic record of suffering that should be a catalyst and a reason for us to remain Jews. You know, this past week, we read Parshat Shlach, where the 12 scouts go to scout the land that they're about to enter. And we know, because of the report that 10 of the 12 came back with, the Israelites were then destined, punished, and had to wander around for years and years and years. Well, what was the big error of those scouts? What was it? You remember? They came back and they said, yes, it's a land of Eretz Avat Chalav Udvash, milk and honey, and it's got grapes. But what was it? Where was it that they went wrong?
They saw
Anyone?
themselves as grasshoppers and that they wouldn't be able to defeat those who lived there. They were afraid
Okay.
to fight.
All
They
right.
didn't trust in Hashem.
They didn't trust in God, and they had this image of themselves as being as weak as grasshoppers. Yes. Anybody else? Okay, I'm just bringing this as an aside. I'm reading from Parshat Shlach, and it says, they reported to him and said, we arrived at the land to which you sent us, and indeed it flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. But the people that dwells in the land is powerful. Now, another plug for learning Hebrew. In the Hebrew, it says, Eretz Avat Chalav Udvash, v'zeh piryah. Efes ki az ha'am. Efes. Anybody know what the word Efes means?
Zero.
Zero. It also means nullify. Like I'll see on a device of mine, when I have to put in a new code, it will first say la'afes, to nullify the old code. So anybody know another way of saying but in Hebrew?
Ella.
Ella, what else?
Rafal.
Aval,
Ah,
okay?
ah.
So what's the significance? And this is where some commentators feel the scouts went wrong. That like perhaps this generation, they said Ephes. Why did they use that word? Because they were saying we're nullifying this mission that God wants us to go on, this task, this burden, as Marlene called it. And I know you don't just feel that it's a burden. Okay, so that was the issue. And these were the leaders. Each of the 12 scouts was a leader. And they come back, except for the two, Caleb and Yoshua, and they say, no, let's stay in the Midbar, in the desert. We don't want to go and be responsible for a new land. Adin Steinsaltz actually compares this to those who study full-time in a kollel and don't want to face the real world. So the leaders had already nullified the mission, going back. Let's go on and see in our liturgy as well. You know, in the Baruch, this tension of particular and universal is through and through in the Siddur as well. So we have Baruch in Shachrit in the morning, and we have it in Mariv in the evening. And in each service, there are two themes immediately after Baruch Hu et Adonai Amvarach. So the first one in the morning says, blessed are you, who forms light and creates darkness, makes peace and creates all. Yotzer Or. That is meant for us to be aware that God is God of everyone, universal. Yet, the next theme after Yotzer Or is Ahava Rabbah. You have loved us with great love. Enlighten our eyes in your Torah. And similarly, in Mariv, again, universal. Blessed are you, God creates day and night. And then after Ahavat Olam, with everlasting love, you loved your people, the house of Israel. You have taught us Torah and commandments. So again, we see that we have the universal and then the particular. And should there be an issue with that? Now, Jewish tradition does instruct Jews, us, to grant precedence to the Jewish community when concretizing rules regarding chesed and tzedek, acts of kindness and justice. So here's an example in the Talmud. A member of one's household takes precedence over everyone else. That shouldn't be surprising. The poor of one's household takes precedence over the poor of one city. And the poor of one's own city take precedence over the poor of other cities. Does anyone have an issue with this? Yes. Somebody said yes. Go ahead. No? I thought I heard yes. Okay, to me, you know, if you were talking about the fires, if I'm driving down my street and I see a fire engine, is it wrong of me to first think, is it my family? On the other hand, Hillel, the great, we're all familiar, says, not on the other hand, but he agrees with this, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am only for myself alone, what am I? But that's a natural flow. Excuse me. that I have to, on an airline, on an airplane, and before the flight takes off, or maybe while you've already taken off, and the stewardess shows you what to do in case of an emergency, and you have to get the oxygen. What are you supposed to do if you're sitting next to a child?
You put on your own.
You first.
Okay, exactly. You won't be able to help the child if you're not okay. Now, Maimonides went on centuries later. One ought to treat the resident stranger, non-Jew, with derech eretz, civility and humanity, and chesed, mercy and kindness, just as one does a Jew, for we are commanded to support them. Okay?
Mhm.
A very clear message. And I think we have a pretty good reputation regarding that. In the next text, I hear a passion that I talked of before, a passion for this ancient summons to fulfill the raison d'etre of our chosenness. This is Yossi Klein Halevi, the author of the book that Stan had mentioned a couple of months ago, Letters to My Palestinian
Palestinian neighbor.
Yeah. Worth reading. So
Correct.
look what he says today. To effect this universalist vision, the Jewish people was paradoxically set apart as a testing ground for the possibility of redemptive interaction between humanity and God. For as a people, the Jews are a random cross-section of humanity. If this people, and he's going to sound like Shimshon Raphael Hirsch here, if this people could be transformed into an instrument for divine intimacy, then the hope of a realized transcendence could be extended eventually to all peoples. As a people, we have been given this task at many different moments. Abraham was to become the first believer in an ethical God. He journeyed forth and journeyed into himself to experience the sacred truths. This task was given to the Jewish people at the Exodus and at Sinai. History's first experiment in egalitarian redemption, where revelation and access to sacred text were not reserved for the elite alone. You read very carefully, you see, El Kol Yisrael, every single one of us, not reserved just for the elite or the intellectuals, every one of us. Now, if we, and I know that I'm going to be very bold with this, if we don't feel compelled by this summons, why remain Jewish? With everything that's going on.
Well, Bracha, you
Go
could
on.
make a case for, identifying with a culture and a history and a language and the music and you don't have to have the theology and
Okay, well, okay, Linda, of course. And I knew somebody would say everything that you said, that those are important for my identity, for our identity. But I guess when you say theology, and if this generation has a difficult problem with the supreme power of God, there should be something. So forget God. We've done that already a few months ago. We put God second. But there's a mission here, just as human beings, to want to help the rest of the world. And it can be based. I guess what is saddening is that too many don't see that what's necessary in the world is suggested in this gift that we were given.
Bracha. I
And
recall way back with my grandfather, Avla Shalom, and grandmother, who came from shtetl mentality. But they used to sit down and read the Yiddish paper in Toronto. Sometimes there was a scandal in the city. And they would sit down, I would sit at their elbow, and they say, oh, we hope that that person, let's see what the name is. Because they wanted to make sure that that person wasn't a Jewish person who stole the money or got into trouble with the bank or got into trouble with the law.
where? Dan, you muted yourself. Is anybody hearing him?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Now, yes.
You heard the beginning, of my,
We heard the
Oh.
beginning.
yeah, so they used to scan and look for that name. If the name was Jewish, they say, oh yeah, Shanda. And they said, listen, what the message is that you should understand is that you should always make sure that what you do is going to reflect on all of us. So we're going to take this to another level. This is, and they weren't they weren't orthodox, but they understood the message that Yossi Klein Halevi is talking about here. That we're set because of the message that came down, that we have a special mission. It went into their DNA that they understood that you had to have a good name or else you're going to reflect badly on the whole Jewish nation.
But I think what you just described is probably the issue. That you said
Yes.
it's in their DNA. You could have said it was in their guts.
They're kishkas. Yes.
They're kishkas. That's the word I was looking for. And they're kishkas. And that's what's missing somehow. It's got to be in your kishkas.
Bracha, it's Michael. When I
Yes,
grew up,
Michael.
I went to a cheder 6 days a week for 5 years. Never once did I hear about the Jews having a mission. And even my parents and family, I don't ever remember being taught that. It wasn't until in my late 20s when I started getting involved in Judaism on myself. And when I first heard this and I first read about it, it struck me like a sledgehammer. And I thought, wow, there is a reason for my life. Because you think, why am I here? What's the point? And no matter what I come up with, didn't make sense. Didn't matter. But to be told you're trying to make the world a better place, what a fabulous mission. And I created a course that I taught in a public high school in Jewish studies.
Mhm.
And I could see kids like me who had no idea, but now I'm getting them at age 16, not 28. And I could see the same thing when they found out that mission, their eyes opened up. Really? Seriously? Whoa, this is something really amazing. So I think the younger that you teach kids this, the more success we're going to have with it. It's a fantastic mission. It's fantastic to make the world a better place. Everything else pales.
Bravo. I don't want to embarrass you, but remind me of the name of your grandson that I knew for a couple years at camp.
Jonah.
Jonah, you can see that he has that spark that you just described. I remember that. Okay, thank you. All right, that's what I want to hear. And thank you, Stan, for your comment as well. And of course, this notion of it not being just something that is our fate, but our destiny. Rav Yosef Soloveitchik. A machaneh, camp, designates a coming together for protection and self-defense. It is a product of faith, but an Eidah, congregation, like Adat Yisrael, on the other hand, is created as a result of the recognition of a shared past, but also of mutual aspirations, a common destiny. The congregation is a holy nation that has no fear of fate and is not compelled to live against its will. It believes in its own destiny, like that fish, and it dedicates itself out of its own free will to the realization of that destiny. The elevation of a camp people to the rank of a holy congregation nation, and the transformation of shared fate to shared destiny. Now, I want to bring to you one very current application of this thought that our Tanakh can guide us with contributing to the world. I came across a wonderful book by a fellow named Avi Yorish. He is a seasoned entrepreneur, a Middle East expert. He's a senior fellow at American Foreign Policy Council and the Israel Project. And he's written a book called Thou Shalt Innovate. And this is what he says. And in the book, it's a wonderful read. His stories behind some of the many wonderful innovations that Israel has gifted to the world. And he says, Israel, I have come to believe, is a nation with the soul of a synagogue, a country where Jewish prophetic tradition has created a culture of innovation, being marshaled in large part to solve the world's most formidable problems. The pursuit of modern day miracles is a universal yearning, with no one tradition holding exclusive rights over the impulse. Any nation can try, but also one that has deeply taken root in this country. Israel does not have a monopoly on good ideas or proper execution, and he suggests all countries would benefit from tapping into their own cultures in order to apply their own lessons to the industries and professions they have excelled in for centuries. So he is giving the responsibility to the whole world. And I would venture to think that each country would feel that they have something to contribute to the world. And so if it's not the Jewish mission, then anyone who's living in Canada, Argentina, whatever, should have its own country's mission, something to give, it seems to me. And he explains the source of this innovative success. Firstly, he says it's Israeli chutzpah. It's diversity, and it's the dearth of natural resources. But most importantly, and interestingly, he says,
No, you don't have that.
it is a religious culture. It has a religious culture that encourages questioning and challenging authority and defying obstacles. Wow. Oh, that's what we have to say today. Anyone want to share? Now that I see more of you, I see Shirley Ann Haber. Did you know that Shirley Ann and Harvey have loved each other for 60 years? Happy anniversary.
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov.
Thank you so
Anybody
much.
else having any anniversary? Okay. All right.
Bracha, this last guy, he's not a Dutty guy, is he?
What did you say?
Why do you say that?
Well, I think that's so, but I don't know.
But why did you say it? Why do you assume that he's not?
Well, because I just looked him up.
He's not Dutchy.
And why is that significant?
Well, it's very significant. I mean,
Why?
you know,
Why?
Why?
Everybody's asking why.
because he is perpetuating the tradition, the ideas of our religious community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have to read to you. There are many reviews. You know how in a book it puts comments from famous people. I don't know if you're familiar with Rabbi Erwin Kula, who's the president of Klal, that Rabbi Yitz Greenberg was associated with, National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership. And he says the following: "Thou shalt innovate, grasp the truth of this era. Innovation is a sacred task, and technology a sacred means enabling us to repair this world." What I take from that is that he realizes it isn't just ritual that is sacred, but these tasks as well of inventing this and inventing that, or sending a medical crew to Haiti, etc., that is also avodat kodesh.
Yeah.
Join me in praying that whatever happens on Sunday is for good. I mean, for good, not necessarily for ever. And we want to wish Bernice, who is finally having her surgery on Tuesday for her knee, may you be able to walk tall after that. And everybody, please stay well. And I'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you, Bracha.
Wonderful.
It was
Excellent.
great.
Thanks,
Thank
Bracha.
you.
Good stuff.
Take care.
Thank you, Bracha. Beautiful.
Have a
Well,
good dinner
Harvey-
tomorrow
Harvey
night.
has to go.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm about to start cooking, Merle.
I thought you're going out. Aren't you going out?